Working at an amusement park, Part 9, Firewater. This new series is written by Reddit user Girl from the Crypt. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. I work in an amusement park where only half the actors are actual actors. Some of the suggestions on yesterday's post really piqued my interest. This is why I decided to take your advice to heart and try out a couple of things. I live in a small apartment located in a larger residence right by a very busy street. The lady who I live next door to is a friendly older woman with an avid passion for gardening. She keeps a ton of potted plants on her balcony and all throughout her home. I've been over to her place a few times to chat and have lunch together, so I knew she would gladly help me out. She sure was surprised to have me knock on her door in the early morning hours and ask if she had any laurel plants. Still, she scurried off into her living room and returned with a greenery sprouting twig, which she handed to me with a friendly smile. I thanked her and told her I would explain my strange request someday when I could find the time. Before I got on my way to the park, I took out my cell phone and dialed my manager's number. He had given it to us for emergencies only, but I guess under the given circumstances, I could allow myself a tiny bit of misconduct. Dale picked up almost instantly. "What happened?" he asked straight away, his tone surly and annoyed. "Nothing. Listen, Dale, we need to talk." "We do we?" he muttered after a long sigh. "About what?" he then asked. "I have some questions about the Pretenders. There are just some things I need to know. I have to..." My voice trailed off. "Please," I added sternly, "don't tell me you've been running around behind my back playing detective or some crap," he responded in a low, slightly menacing tone. "No, of course not," I stammered, trying to sound confident. "Who do you think I am?" "What?" Dale sounded a bit confused, but caught himself rather quickly. "Lee, how many times do I have to tell you not to interfere with other people's business?" he hissed, but I could sense a hint of desperation to his disgruntled voice. "Why can't you just do your job and let me do mine?" "I don't want to interfere with your job in any way. It's just that I've been feeling sort of creeped out lately. It all came crashing down on me one day recently that I don't actually know where the Pretenders come from and what they are. Like reality check, you know? I only want to know a few things so that I can feel safe working here again," I explained, hoping I had sounded emotional enough for him to believe my excuses. A long pause followed. So long in fact that I already started wondering if he had hung up on me, before he finally answered. "Okay, fine. I'll meet you at my office today, 4 p.m. Do not be late. That doesn't mean I'll tell you what you want to know, but we are going to have a talk. That's all I can and will do for you. Now will you leave me a note alone from now on?" "Sure," I lied, fiddling excitedly with a laurel twig. "Why do I have a feeling you won't?" Dale pondered before giving one final sigh and added, 4 in the afternoon, my office. See you there." With that, he ended the call. When I arrived at the park, Darius was waiting for me by the employee entrance. "Hi there," he greeted me sleepily before letting out a yawn and nodding at the twig in my hand, adding, "What's that about?" "It's Laurel," I said curtly. "Oh, like because of the diva?" I nodded and the two of us stepped inside, heading for Mr. Scratch's repurposed cage. The nurse was standing inside as if she had not moved at all during our absence. She was staring blankly into the distance as we approached. I placed the laurel twig on the ground before pulling the key to the cage out of my pocket, only to halt mid-motion. "Hey, let's show her the key, see if she reacts in any way." "Okay, sure," Darius replied, fumbling for the small object before producing it from within his jacket and holding it out for the nurse to see. The not actor continued to voidly gaze past us, not paying any attention to the key. Darius cleared his throat. "Hey, remember how you shoved this down my throat?" he asked, more jokingly than serious, and I rolled my eyes. Finally, he put away the key and turned back to me. "You gonna let it out now?" I nodded affirmatively and stepped forward to unlock the door. The pretender didn't budge. Her eyes were as glazed and empty as always. Darius swallowed audibly as he inched closer to her, reached out and carefully placed his hands on her shoulders. The moment his palms made contact with her body, a low, guttural groan erupted from her throat. He slowly, ever so slowly, pulled her out of the shelter. "Huh?" he uttered. "She seems to be all normal again." Still on high alert, I picked up my laurel twig once again. Darius and I exchanged concerned glances as he stepped back from the pretender. Once we had both calmed down a bit, I went to get the sock puppet. My colleague watched me feed and pet him, and when he had settled back down in his shelter, Darius and I took a seat on the bench nearby to talk and watch over the nurse, who was still standing right beside the funhouse where her handler had walked her over to. I admit we wasted a lot of time chatting and pretending all was well. It was nice not having to worry about the mystery of the park for once, but come 3 p.m. I remembered my appointment with Dale. Time to get serious. I told Darius about my exchange with Joshua the previous day and what I had found out. I also informed him of my impending meeting with the manager, and then asked him to lend me the nurse's key, which he willingly handed to me. "I can't believe he'll actually talk to you about the park. Does he know we've been snooping around?" he inquired. "Of course not. Well, I do think he has a feeling I might have caught on to some of the odd stuff around here. I believe he only sees me as a curious employee, though. I'm certain he doesn't know anything about the key." I gave Darius a reassuring smile. "I'm taking it because it might fit into something inside of his office. I mean, I doubt I'll get the chance to try it, but who knows?" My colleague nodded sternly. "Best of luck then, I guess," he muttered with a frown. "Don't, tell on us. Watch what you say." While this might have sounded like a threat coming from anybody else, Darius's tone was genuinely concerned. "Don't worry, I will," I assured him before setting off for the Hollywood section. There was one more thing I had to do before meeting with Dale. I found the aged diva sitting on a bench on the main plaza. She was staring up at the sky absent-mindedly and almost seemed startled when I sat down beside her. Without saying a word, I pulled out the laurel twig and handed it to her. She took it with her slender, wrinkly fingers and regarded it silently. "Is this what you wanted to tell us?" I asked softly. She didn't respond. Her sudden quiet attitude reminded me a lot of the nurse. She looked up at me with a blank expression before her lips began to curl into a wide smile. "Why, hello there, dearie. I didn't see you coming," she said. "Is this place cursed?" I whispered. "You wrote down the word laurel for us when Oliver and I talked to you yesterday. At first I thought it was your name, but then I found out that laurel, as in bay leaves, can be used to cleanse a place of negativity or to break a curse. Is that what you wanted to tell us? Does the park need cleansing?" The elderly woman stared at me for a few seconds before suddenly tightening her grip on the delicate, helpless laurel twig and snapping it in half. My jaw dropped as she took both pieces and began breaking them down into smaller and smaller ones, crushing the bright green leaves in the process. She was mumbling something under her breath, her voice steadily growing louder and louder until it rose to a scream. "That ugly misshapen brat! That ugly misshapen brat! That ugly misshapen brat! That ugly misshapen brat!" Will that? She hurled the tiny pieces of the laurel twig in her hand away from her with all her might. I watched as they flew through the air and hit the ground a small distance ahead of us. The diva then let out a low gurgle as the corners of her eyes began to droop and her skin started to melt. I didn't stick around to wait for that explosion. When I arrived at Dale's office, I found the door to be open just a crack. I decided to knock anyways. "Dale, it's Lee," I called out. "You said we could talk." "Come on in," my manager's voice came from inside. I nudged open the door and entered the small room. Dale was sitting at his table, or rather slouching. While I had never thought of him as much of a lively person, he somehow managed to look even more under the weather than usual. Dale is a shorter, slightly overweight guy with greasy sand blonde hair. I have never seen him clean shaven, and there are always dark bags under his brown eyes. He usually wears long sleeve shirts and cargo pants, both of which normally are way too baggy to be flattering in any way. "Hello," he slurred. Have a seat." He pointed at the chair across from him. I frowned. Are you drunk?" I inquired. I didn't really need an answer though, seeing as when I approached him and sat down, I spotted the 2 bottles of whiskey on his desk, one of which had already been emptied halfway. "A little," he admitted, covering his mouth to suppress a hiccup. "Should I come back another time, when you're, sober, maybe?" I offered. No, you stay right there. You wanted to ask me a couple of things, right?" he inquired, seemingly straining himself to appear focused. "Yes, if you don't mind." Still a bit uncertain, I straightened up in my chair and cleared my throat. "But first off, I'd like to know why you're drunk at 4 in the afternoon." Dale looked at me with bleak eyes. "Is that really so surprising to you? This is what you truly see me as, isn't it? I'm the asshole boss who sits in his ivory tower sipping champagne while you and your friends work your asses off." "That's whiskey you're having there, though," I remarked. "What? That was a figure of speech. Well, it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you don't know shit about me, missy. You think..." His voice trailed off and he frowned as if he had forgotten what he was about to say. "You think I'm the bad guy, but you don't know shit," he finally added. It was hard to take him serious. "Look, Dale, I don't think you're the bad guy, but you have never given me any reason to trust you. All I want to know is whether this place..." "Fuck this place," Dale interrupted me. "To hell with it. I know you've been going behind my back trying to find out where the pretenders come from. Don't play dumb with me," he called out. "I'm not some... His voice trailed off and he fumbled for words. "I just don't fall for it. Doesn't work on me." He leaned over to me across the table, close enough for me to smell the stench of alcohol in his breath. "You know why I don't care though? Because you'll never ever find out the whole truth." "So you admit you're keeping information from your employees?" I inferred. Dale let out a high-pitched laugh. Oh, you are cute. Information." He lost himself in a fit of giggles. "Seriously though, you think you know something about what's going on here? You don't. You're barely scraping the tip of the iceberg. This whole thing is way too big for you. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to get the whole story, because I'm the only one who could theoretically tell you, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't." "Care to explain that to me?" Dale shook his head. "No way. Couldn't care less." His face softened and he once again leaned over to me. "But there's one thing I'll give you, just one small truth, and that is I'm not the bad guy here." I swallowed. "So you're not a threat to me and my co-workers?" I definitely am, but I'm your blessing as well." He sunk back into his chair. His gaze had grown bleak again. God, my life sucks, he slurred. I suddenly remembered the key in my pocket. I quickly glanced over at the file cabinet leaning against Dale's office wall. While I feel guilty about what I did next, I cannot honestly claim that I regret it. I figured if I could get him to drink some more, just a little more, I might just get the one singular chance to try and get into it. Fortune seemed to be on my side this time. My manager turned to me again and asked, "You want some?" He pointed at his whiskey. "I heard they call it firewater. Don't know why, but I think it's because your mouth feels on fire when you drink it." I shrugged. "Sure." Dale bent down and rummaged about in his desk drawers for a few seconds before producing an old-looking, slightly dirty glass which he placed next to his own. He filled up both and handed me the new one. "Two," he began, raising his glass, but apparently realising that he wasn't sure what to drink to. "Hell?" I offered. Dale smirked. "Damn right. To hell with it. I feel like I'm already there anyways." With that, he downed his whiskey in one go before immediately refilling his glass. Not wanting to raise suspicion, I did the same. "Now there's one thing you should know about me. I'm not much of a drinker. I like beer, but that's already it. And I really don't hold my liquor well at all. Already, after my first glass of whiskey, I felt my stomach grow uncomfortably warm. After my second glass, I began to feel a bit too amused. My sudden giggles seemed to have had a contagious effect on my manager as he began to laugh himself. "You know how much I've lost?" he asked in between chuckles, and I shook my head. "I lost a whole lot. Want to know something really sad?" I nodded. "A person I love, or at least someone I used to love. He's dying. He's dying and I'm the one who's killing him. I don't want to, but I've got to. They make me do it." He let out a wheezing laugh, quickly followed by a train of hysterical sobs. He refilled our glasses for the third time. "Who's them?" I inquired with concern that I was slurring myself. "Your family?" Dale looked at me in confusion. "How'd you—" "Whatever. Yes, but it ain't just them. I won't tell you. I won't." His voice slowly trailed off. He filled up glasses number 4 with a shaky hand. He swallowed the contents of his glass after I had done the same before looking at me one last time. Then his head sank down onto his desk. I had trouble getting up from my chair. I felt really sick all of a sudden. Still, I managed to make my way over to the file cabinet. I had to make use of the chance while Dale was out. It took me a while to insert the key into the lock of the cabinet, but to my surprise and delight, it fit perfectly. Upon turning it and sliding open the drawer, my tired eyes were confronted with folders over folders, neatly lined up behind one another in what little space they had. I remember spotting one titled Expenses 2020, another one titled Earnings 2020, and so on. I decided to try the other drawer, which would yield more interesting results. So I bent down and unlocked it. To my surprise, it was completely empty, except for 2 things: an ancient wood-handled revolver and a black and white photograph. I took the latter out of the drawer to inspect it, straining my eyes as I struggled to focus. The picture showed 2 people in very old-fashioned clothing, a man and a younger woman, or maybe still a girl. They were standing next to each other in front of a grey background I found hard to determine. I thought I could make out some trees, but I could have been wrong. What instantly struck me as truly odd, however, was that the faces of the man and the girl could not be seen. They were blank. There were no eyes, no mouths, no noses. Just a blank space where all of that should be. Suddenly, I felt my stomach stand to turn. I knew I was going to be sick. I dropped the photograph back into the drawer and hurried to lock both of it and the upper drawer up again. I quickly tucked away the key in my pocket before dashing out to the door of Dale's office. I had barely made it over to the trash can next to the bench on the Hollywood Plaza when I couldn't confine the contents of my stomach any longer. I threw up into the trash can once, maybe twice, before I sank down onto the bench beside me. My surroundings grew darker and darker as my eyes slowly fluttered shut. I barely noticed the low clacking of boots on the pavement approaching. When I felt someone placing their arms under my own and lifting me up, I didn't resist. When they heaved me over their shoulder like a wet sack of sand, I felt the leather of their vest brush uncomfortably against my skin. They carried me away from the bench. I opened my eyes a few times on our way to see the grey street move underneath me. It was dizzying. The colour of the pavement soon grew darker, then light and sandy. Finally, I don't know for how long the person had been carrying me, they came to a halt and carefully lifted me off their shoulders. I blinked a few times, groaning as I struggled to stay awake. I was so incredibly tired. I found myself sitting on a wooden porch. It looked familiar, and I soon recognised it to belong to the saloon in Twin Vale Point, where my co-workers and I had met at 2 days ago. The man kneeling in front of me, holding my limp body up by the shoulders, was familiar too, although it took me a while to place his features. He looked genuinely concerned. I remembered thinking it was a first, seeing as I usually only knew him with a wide grin on his face. I think I said something, but I can't remember what. It was probably just inaudible stammerings anyway. The cowboy smiled sympathetically, also something I had never seen him do before. He then raised his hand to brush a strand of hair out of my sweaty forehead. His cold, dry-skinned fingers traced down the side of my face and rested on my cheek a little while. I am unsure as to why I remember this particular action so well, but I do. I stared at him with hooded eyes, trying not to drift off to sleep. It felt like he was trying to comfort me. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud voice of a man. I recognised it to be that of Mitchell. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" The cowboy jumped to his feet, and I immediately flopped down onto the rough wood below me. I could hear Mitchell run towards us, and I feel myself being pulled up to my feet. "Lee, holy shit, are you all right?" I heard my colleague ask me. I tried to respond, but no words left my mouth. Mitchell proceeded to walk me over to his car, and after about 5 minutes of me trying to tell him my address, he finally understood where I lived and drove me home. After a refreshing nap in Mitchell's car's back seat, and later on my own couch, I had finally recovered from the whiskey's influence. All that is left of it now is a nasty nagging headache. I told Mitchell about my conversation with Dale and what I had found in the file cabinet, and while we couldn't quite make anything of it, we agreed that things were apparently just continuing to get stranger and stranger. I also told him about the laurel twig, to which he remembered that since the diva had reacted to it in such a weird way, it must be of importance somehow. "Still, we can't go around performing any weird rituals or whatever," he warned me in a low voice to go easy on my headache. "Who knows why she destroyed the twig after all? We need to figure this out first, then we decide what to do about it." "Dale was certain we wouldn't find anything out though," I muttered, massaging my temples. "At least he said as much." Mitchell grunted. What does he know? He was rolling drunk. Obviously he didn't make any sense. Although did he really say he was into guys? I shot him an angry glare. "That's what you care about, of all the things I just told you?" "What? I'm just curious," Mitchell retorted. I sighed. He said something about how a man he loves is dying, and that he's the one who's killing him because he's being forced to. Mitchell leaned back against the cushion of my couch, staring at the ceiling in thought. He stayed a bit longer to keep me company. Later that night, when my colleague had left, I got a call from Dale himself. He sounded terrible, embarrassed and tired all at the same time. Hi, I wanted to apologise. I just woke up like half an hour ago. While most of our exchange escapes me, it was probably really unprofessional. If I did anything, well, gross, I want you to know I'm sorry. No worries, I told him. We just had some whiskey together, and you whined about your life, but that's all. Oh, he paused. I was meaning to tell you to stop asking me about stuff. Did I do that? Yeah, you did actually. I won't stop though. Figured as much. Well, you're not going to get too far anyways, so I'm not too worried. Do as you please, just stay out my hair. And there he was, Dale's good old douchey normal self. After advising him politely to see a therapist, I hung up. I was relieved he apparently hadn't noticed that I'd messed with his file cabinet. I spent the rest of the night watching TV, but in the back of my head I kept thinking about what my manager had told me in his drunken stupor. Then exactly 12 minutes after midnight I had an idea. It's completely absurd, but if it's true, it might be the most brilliant thought I've ever had. All I know for now though is that I need to talk to Nathan again, more than ever. Working at an amusement park, Part 10. I hitched a ride on the stagecoach today. This wonderful series is written by Reddit user Girl from the Crypt. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. I work at an amusement park where only half of the actors are actual actors. I think I've mentioned a couple of times before that I'm a huge fan of Wild West movies. This is probably why I'm so fascinated by the stagecoach. My daydreams about this gorgeous carriage usually involve steering it, sitting inside of it and being driven around, or even riding on top of its roof like the Laughing Cowboy. I really am a bit envious of him about that. Ever since I first saw the stagecoach, I just wanted to ride in it so badly, be it only once. Well, it seems this dream of mine has finally become sweet reality today, and I paid the price for it all right. My chest and stomach hurt like hell, but it was worth it. Let me explain. Before getting on my way to work today, I went down to the small convenience store on my street to purchase a few things I would need that same day. The store is tiny and run by a grumpy, chubby older dude with a grey beard who always wears a Panama hat. It has this musty, stale feel to it, but I sort of like it. Plus, the clerk and I like to joke around sometimes. I think he was even rather happy to see me today, since I can hardly imagine he's been getting a lot of customers lately. I was the only one in the store, except for the owner of course. I carried a few candy bars from the shelves and carried them over to the cash register. I then proceeded to inspect the array of cigarettes and other tobacco products lined up in front of the clerk before picking out a colourful metal box of chewing tobacco and adding it to my pile of junk food. The clerk looked me up and down with a mild surprise. "Usually the only thing you buy here are protein bars and soda," he remarked. "They say the only constant is change," I replied. The bearded man grunted amusedly before beginning to ring up my purchases. When he reached the box of chewing tobacco, he held it up to study it. "Getting a little something for your man, huh?" he presumed. "Way off. I want it for myself. I can't get enough of it," I said jokingly, and the clerk chuckled and shook his head. When he had bagged all of my items, I went back to my apartment to get my whip and remaining necessities before stopping by at my neighbour's place to ask for some more laurel. I decided to keep experimenting with it. I set out for the park with one clear goal in mind, to talk to Nathan. I felt a bit like a stalker the way I snuck up to the entrance sign at the Twinvale Point before tending to the sock puppet at 6 in the morning. I could hear the sounds of the oncoming carriage in the distance. I waited by the town entrance for the horses to come into sight. As soon as they did, I began waving at Nathan, who was still sitting in his coach seat as always. I swear I could see him roll his eyes even from half a mile away. The coachman sure wasn't happy to see me. That didn't stop me though. I ran up to him and came to a halt right in front of the horses, forcing him to stop so as not to run me over. I smiled at him and made my way over to where he was sitting. "Hi," I said. "Hello," he said dryly. "Are you a little more willing to talk to me now by any chance?" I asked. Nathan leaned over to me. The smell of his blanket instantly penetrated my nostrils. "Look at my face and tell me yourself," he growled. "You look like you wish you hadn't stopped the stagecoach just now," I remarked. Nathan grimaced. "Wow. Here I was thinking you had no self-awareness. I didn't know you were simply ignoring it. You sound a bit like Dale," I commented. Nathan's reaction to my manager's name was instantaneous. His expression darkened, and for a second I thought his face would scrunch up like that of a baby and he would start to cry. Instead, he just swallowed audibly before cracking the reins and shouting at his horses to start moving again. I sighed and sat down by the entrance sign. He drives around in circles, so I know he'd have to come by again eventually. I found myself wishing for company. Maybe Darius or Mitchell would come by soon, or better yet, one of the other girls. It had been a while since the last time I had privately talked to Anne or Maxine. I sat and waited for about 15 minutes before the sound of horseshoes clacking guided me out of my thoughts. I stood up and casually walked up to the approaching stagecoach. Nathan looked even more annoyed to see me this time. "Would some chocolate change your mind? I brought some junk food from home," I called out to him, shrugging the backpack I was wearing off my shoulders. "You've got to be hungry, right?" Nathan groaned. "Damn, you're persistent." I nodded. Nathan puffed. "Leave me alone. I mean it. No clue what you want to know, but I probably won't be able to tell you." "Let's try it then. Come on, please," I begged, but Nathan just shook his head and set the carriage into motion again. Another round of waiting until once again the carriage came rolling up to me. I rose to my feet. This time Nathan stopped the stagecoach right next to where I was standing. He stared at me, calculating for a moment before nodding at the empty space beside him on the coach seat. "Hop on," he ordered curtly. "You mean it?" Nathan rolled his eyes and nodded. "Quick, before I change my mind." He didn't have to tell me twice. I climbed onto the stagecoach and sat down next to him. "I'd hold on to my seat if I were you," Nathan told me before cracking the reins and shouting, "Giddy up!" The horses neighed and began trotting off. The carriage bucketed jerkily over the sandy, bumpy ground. I could hardly believe it. I was actually on the stagecoach, and it felt awesome. "So, what about the sudden change of heart?" I inquired, trying hard to keep my cool. "You wouldn't just keep waiting anyways. Best to just get it over with," Nathan explained. "Also, this is what you always wanted, isn't it? Don't pretend. I see you watch the carriage all day, you know." I let out a flustered chuckle. "True, I guess I'm a bit of a fan." For a split second, I thought I could see a smile appear and quickly vanish again on the coachman's face. "It's not that great when you're the one driving it," he muttered with downcast eyes before looking up at me again. "So, what do you know?" Swallowing down my apprehension, I began. "I know for sure that this park is family run. I also know that something really messed up is happening to you and I want to help. Then there's some stuff I believe I know, but I'm not fully certain about." "What would that be?" Nathan sounded calm, but stern. "I had a conversation with Dale yesterday. He was very much intoxicated. He didn't make a lot of sense, so I had to piece together what little snippets he gave me." I took a deep breath. "I think you and Dale used to be quite fond of one another, but then for some reason he gave you the task of driving the stagecoach. I believe you're turning into a not actor, or rather, becoming one with this one here. Nathan leaned back in his seat and pulled the smelly blanket closer around his shoulders. That last part, it's true, all of it, but I don't know any more either. You don't? I was a bit taken aback. He sounded like he was telling the truth, but I had somehow expected him to have more insight. Will you still tell me what you know? Not sure if it'll be much help. Nathan regarded me with a sad smile. I insist, I said sternly. It will help, I'm sure of it. The coachman's grip on the horse's reins tightened and he let out a soft sigh. You said you had candy? I nodded and I opened my backpack, pulling out a chocolate bar at random. I unwrapped it before handing it to him. The young man took a large bite out of it and began chewing. His expression softened. Thanks. I didn't have anything sweet since, I don't know. To be honest, it's been that long since I last got off the stagecoach. I don't really need to eat at all anymore. Still, nice having something that tastes good though. I felt myself becoming excited in light of what I was about to hear, but decided not to interrupt him. Better let him take his time. Dale and I first met in high school, but we were just friends then. Later, years after both of us had graduated, we reconnected and decided to get some coffee together. We hit it off right away, and that's kinda how we became a thing. He was fascinating to me. He was always so emotional and contemplative. He was a bit of a mystery too. So sweet though, really, really caring and sweet. I had never felt safer with anyone else before. Dale truly cared about me. He never made a big deal about it either. It was just so natural for him to be there for me whenever I needed him. He had just taken over his dad's job as park manager and I was unemployed, so he got me a job as a waiter here at the park. It might seem weird to you that my boss was my boyfriend as well, but it was all pretty great. We were happy during that time, like really happy, until one day he waited for me outside the restaurant I worked at after closing hours. He had tears in his eyes. He tried to hide it but looked incredibly sad. I asked him what was wrong, but he told me it was nothing and that he needed to tell me I was going to do another job at the park from now on. He said I was going to be an actor. I asked him why and he told me he had gotten instructions to have me change jobs and that he had to follow them. See, I didn't know why he was so sad. I mean, it was strange, sure, but I didn't get why he was crying. He asked me to drop the subject and we went home. Back then, I used to live with him, you know. Even at home, he was acting all strange and depressed and I didn't know what had gotten into him. I was worried sick. Anyways, I had promised to drop it, so I didn't dare ask any further questions. Instead, I did my best to take care of him. Dale's always been so sensitive. I remember telling him that whatever he was feeling so down about, we would work it out together and that we could count on me. His response, I remember it like it was yesterday. He told me he knew and that was why he was so sorry. He kept begging me for forgiveness. It was beyond confusing. The next day he led me to the stagecoach. I had seen it around before. It used to have another coachman, but he was all gone all of a sudden. Never saw him around again, by the way. Dale told me he had quit, but I had my doubts. He said that I would be the new coachman, and when I told him I had never driven a carriage before, he simply said I'd learn it by myself in no time. He was right about that, by the way. Then he just suddenly pulled out a bottle of Coke and handed it to me. He told me he had gotten it for me as a refreshment, so naturally I thanked him and started drinking it. The moment I took the first swig from it though, Dale started to weep. Like really horrible, heartbreaking crying. I instantly attempted to comfort him. He was completely inconsolable though. We sat down on the coach seat together and I hugged him while he cried. I finished up the soda a few minutes later. I remember thinking it tasted weird. When Dale noticed I had emptied it, he took the bottle and stared at it for a while. "I'm so terribly sorry," he whispered. I was still taken aback, but I told him I loved him, and then he kissed me. That was the last time we ever talked. It didn't occur to me that he had poisoned me until later. I trusted him. I would have trusted him with my life. So when I started convulsing and everything began to spin around me, I was still like, it can't be, he'd never hurt me. I had to face it though when I found myself unable to leave the seat of the carriage. I would instantly start to feel sick again whenever I did. At first I was still able to leave for the bathroom and to eat from time to time, but I felt it getting harder and harder day by day. I found myself unable to leave the park. After 2 years I wasn't able to leave Twinville Point, and then 3 years ago, shortly before you started working here, I noticed that I wasn't getting thirsty or hungry anymore. From then on, every time I got off the stagecoach for any other reason than to mind the horses or the carriage in any way, it started to hurt. It hurt so much that I just stopped. Nathan looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. I don't know why Dale did this to me. I'm sure he didn't want to. Someone forced him to do it, but I don't know who or how or why. Or... His voice trailed off. That's all I know. I've tried making sense of all of this more times than I can count, but it doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. I'll get you out of here, I promised. I've been working on figuring out a bunch of stuff. Once I've gotten it all together, I'll know a way to help you. Just hang in there, okay? Nathan smiled softly and shook his head. No, I appreciate it, but it's too late for me. His voice had grown very quiet all of a sudden as he said, I'm never leaving here. I opened my mouth to protest, but he shushed me. I mean it, he whispered. The horses came to an easy halt and the coachman lowered the reins, pinning them between his knees, as his hands reached up to slowly remove the smelly blanket draped around his shoulders. The shirt he was wearing underneath was old, stained and wrinkly. He moved his hands up to unbutton it, revealing his chest. At first I thought his skin looked like it had suffered a severe sunburn, but the closer I inspected it, the more I realised that amongst the innumerable large blisters, parts of it were overlapping as if they had moulded into each other. It looked grotesque and strange, but above all else extremely painful. When did this happen? I muttered. It spreads every time I get off the stagecoach, he explained as he buttoned up his shirt and once again wrapped the blanket around himself. I imagined the secretions from the blisters popping, trickling into its fabric, and couldn't help but gag slightly. There has to be some way of stopping it, I professed, feeling a hint of desperation in my own voice. I don't think there is, Nathan replied as he picked up the reins again. You know, he confessed as the carriage set into motion again, I didn't think I would, but I enjoyed talking to you. It's been a while. I've just lost track of everything over time. As I said, I don't even feel things like thirst or hunger anymore. In fact, I kind of feel numb. I think that it's part of whatever's transformation I'm undergoing here, to stop caring. I've come to terms with it. I didn't know what else to say, so I kept quiet for a little while before asking, were Dale's parents against the relationship? It could have been them who forced him to, you know. Nathan pondered for a few seconds before shaking his head. I don't think so. If they did, they were never open about it. I only met them on very few occasions though, so I'm not sure. Where'd you get the blanket though? I don't know. It was lying next to me one morning when I woke up. Maybe Dale gave it to me. Any idea what could have been in that soda, maybe? No clue. I told you I didn't know much at all about the park. I only know what's happening to me, but that's already it. After a short pause he added, would you like to keep me company some more? Of course I said yes. After we talked some more about unrelated things, Nathan decided to entertain us by having the horses speed up a little, then a little more, and then a lot, until we were basically flying over the streets of Twinvale Point. We were both losing our shit and I was laughing like crazy. It was insanely fun. You'd never believe how fast this carriage could actually go. I felt the cool winds hit my face and tussle my hair. As I was saying, I was enjoying myself until I found myself unable to hold on to my seat anymore. At first, Nathan offered me his arm as a means of support, but I had to let go of it soon since it was hindering him in steering the carriage. I felt myself steadily slipping off to the side, and I called out to Nathan to slow down, but by the time the horses had taken on a safe pace again, I had already fallen off. My contact with the dirty ground was more than painful. I landed flat on my stomach and continued to slide across the street a couple of inches, just enough for road pebbles to pierce my shirt and scrape my skin. The impact left a nasty graze on my chin, and I later found that there were large bruises along my collarbone as well as around my hips and belly. "Are you okay?" I heard Nathan shout, but his voice lost itself in the distance as the horses continued to carry him off. "I'm fine," I yelled back, hoping he would hear me. I didn't want him to turn back and get off the stagecoach, knowing what I knew now. It took me some effort to push myself up from the ground, groaning and aching. I managed to rise to a sitting position, only to stop and pull up my shirt a little to inspect the burning scratches on my skin. Suddenly, a hand appeared in front of my face. I looked up to find the laughing cowboy towering over me. I quickly straightened out my shirt and grabbed his hand so he could pull me to my feet. "Hey, just who I was looking for," I uttered, my voice still a bit agonised from the fall. "Say, how come you're always around whenever I need assistance?" The question was rhetorical, of course. The cowboy didn't respond. He just smiled and lifted his hat to me before turning around and beginning to walk off. "Wait a second!" He halted, allowing me to catch up to him with faltering steps. I took off my backpack and began to rummage around inside until I produced the slim metal box of tobacco. I don't know if you'd like this kind of thing, but I really didn't know what else to get you. I just wanted to get you a little something as thanks for being so nice to me. You helped my clumsy ass out so many times that I've stopped counting already. I held the box out to him and he carefully took it from my hands, a pensive look on his face. He eyed it in what looked to be disbelief for a few seconds before tucking it away in one of his pockets. I smiled. We continued to stare at one another, and I found myself unsure of what to say. I watched the black saliva trickle from the corner of his mouth. It was almost hypnotic. I finally remembered something. Reaching into my backpack, I took out the new laurel twig and held it out for him to see. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. His eyes widened, and without warning, he raised his hand and smacked the twig out of my grasp. I watched it sail through the air and hit the ground. The cowboy turned back to me, flashed me his typical wide smile before lifting his hat once again and walking off. I'm starting to think the pretenders really dislike Laurel for some reason. Maybe I should have showed the twig to Nathan too, but after my tumble, I only wanted to get back home. I already mentioned that my whole upper body still hurts quite a lot, which is also the reason why I won't go to the park tomorrow. I have tasked Darius with feeding the sock puppet so I can take the day off to recover. I'll still take time to at least recount one or two of my older job experiences whilst my investigations are on hold for a bit. I'm not entirely sure what to make of my exchange with Nathan. I feel so deeply sorry for him. He may have given up already, but maybe there is still a way to help him after all. Now hope you'll excuse me, for I need to go get a fresh cold pack for my chin and shoulder. As I said, it hurts like hell, but the ride on the stagecoach was totally worth it. Wow, that was an excellent episode. If you enjoyed listening to this instalment, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile as Girl from the Crypt and then drop them a line, tell them what you think of the story. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed my narration, then please feel free to like and share the video, leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap that notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. Have you had any cryptid sightings, paranormal or supernatural encounters? Or do you even have a creepy or terrifying situation that you would like to share? You can submit your stories to cryptidsroost@gmail.com, and if you wish to remain anonymous, not a problem. I'll honour your wishes and keep your identity secret. I also have a new Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit and Discord. Again, all the relevant links are below. If you would like to support the channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. Again, that'll also be below. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.